Welcome back to the Foundations Classroom. I'm your host, Marvin Schneider, and I'm here with my wife and co-founder, world-renowned energy healer, Jen Ward. Today, we're going to talk about something that almost everyone experiences at this stage, and almost everyone misunderstands. We're talking about that moment when it feels like nothing is working anymore. Not your motivation, not your goals, not your coping strategies, not even the tools that used to help you feel oriented. For most people, this is where panic starts. For us, this is where clarity begins.
Yes. And I want to say this very clearly at the outset. If you're in a phase where nothing feels compelling, nothing feels rewarding, and nothing feels urgent anymore, that doesn't mean you're broken. It usually means something very important has already stopped working on purpose.
From a psychological standpoint, this is the phase where people often misdiagnose themselves. They'll say things like, I must be depressed, I've lost my drive, I've become lazy, I need to push myself harder. And because our culture equates worth with momentum, the absence of drive gets interpreted as failure. But that interpretation is almost always wrong.
Energetically, what's happening is this: the systems that were driving you before, identity, survival patterns, external validation loops, are losing charge. Your ego has led the charge up to this point to give you your identity, survival pattern, and external validation markers, and you've become comfortable within those boundaries. But your higher self is putting on the handbrake to give you a moment of pause in which you can reassess your purpose. Without this, you're unlikely to course correct in this life. And that means that you'll need to go through a series of additional lives to have an incarnated experience in communion with higher consciousness, because that's the bigger picture goal of universal consciousness. It's just that most people go through countless lives blissful, unaware, or unprepared for this assignment.
That's true. What I find interesting from a human history perspective is that this is the moment in human evolution where many people finally have the opportunity to accept their sacred assignment and then act on it. More and more people are becoming aware, awakened, insightful, and yet there aren't a whole lot of role models out there on how to live a life of passion and purpose in higher consciousness. Not that I'm a real advocate of becoming a faithful student of a spiritual guru, not at all. My view is that the whole ashram and guru worship model of higher consciousness has run its course. But there is still a role for a community where people can interact, share, learn, and grow. That's our intention for the Reclaim Your Purpose community. Quick shout out, if you haven't yet joined, make sure you do. The link is in the description below. It's free to join. Let's move back to the topic of how to navigate the phase in your purpose journey where you feel like you're hitting a brick wall and that nothing you're trying is working.
And this phase can be tricky to navigate because when nothing's working during transition, the answer is not to find new momentum. It's to stop using force so alignment can emerge without distortion. And herein lies the razor's edge. You need to relax and stop trying to force an outcome, while at the same time not disengaging, becoming complacent, going down the love, trust, and pixie dust path, or just checking out completely.
Exactly. You've hit the nail right on the head. And the razor's edge is tricky to navigate. Most people think there are only two options: forced action or no action, but this is incorrect. There is a third posture, and this is the path less trodden. And the third path is to stay engaged with the journey, but disengaged from forced direction. It is about participation without an agenda. It is about movement without attachment to an outcome. It is about structure without direction. And it is about active responsibly without pressure. Simples, right?
Well, yes and no. Why don't you talk about your hitting the brick wall experiences? You've always been very driven and had a strong sense of purpose, but that doesn't mean everything has gone smoothly, right?
Not at all. In the early days of my career, things just fell into place. I completed an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering and was then accepted into the top business school in Australia, where I completed an MBA degree. That's the kind of degree that gets you into investment banking or corporate consulting. I chose the consulting path because I didn't like the attitude and ethos of investment banking. I was recruited into one of the most prominent and innovative consulting firms in America. They had offices in Australia and the UK. I was assigned to each of those offices over the next 3 years. But for some reason, I think it was ego, I decided to quit consulting and joined one of Australia's largest banks as an internal consultant of sorts. After another 3 years of that, I decided the bureaucracy of corporate life was too much. So I started a solo career in corporate consulting and business valuation. Everything was running smoothly. I was making a ton of money and I had all of the freedom anyone could possibly want. At that point, I teamed up with an old consulting colleague to start up a new style of corporate consulting, helping companies transform themselves to be successful by doing things that enhance the well-being of the individual, the wider community, and the environment. I was convinced that this was a noble purpose and that everyone would want what we had to offer and that I would make tons of money in the process. Well, we spent more than a decade building the IP and marketing this new style of corporate consulting. The IP was great, the ideas were solid, the transformation path was clear, but we couldn't convince anyone to buy our services. It was really tough going, but we kept at it because we were convinced that the world needed what we were offering. And that part was true, but the world was not ready for what we were offering. And to be honest, still isn't. In fact, Trump era has pushed humanity back by decades in terms of a beneficial and sustainable approach to business and finance. It's at about this stage that I first became aware of Jen and her healing abilities. I was blown away by what she was able to do. So we teamed up, and for a while, Jen was helping us clear energetic blockages to manifesting our dream. We put a lot of effort into this and had a lot of expectations, but the universe kept the doors shut. And so, after nearly 15 years invested in this venture, I had to accept that this was not the path the universe had for me. I guess I am a slow learner. So now I'm fully embedded in the healing work with Jen. It's still focused on uplifting humanity, just from a different perspective. What I learned from this experience is that you can't force the universe to do things that the ego wants, but your higher self does not support. That's why a lot of the I want more fame and fortune style of manifestation nonsense that is out there is so misdirected and ultimately harmful.
But here's the thing, while you gave up your career, altered direction, and were challenged financially, you were still supported by the universe. You have everything you need. You have a roof over your head, food on the table, abundance in many ways that are not measured in dollars and cents, and you still have a strong passion for doing purpose led work. That's gold in every sense.
That's true. And that's the real lesson here. You can't force or demand the universe to bend to your will. You need to quietly tap into your higher self for guidance. Follow your instincts in doing the things that are necessary. Be prepared to weather the storm. But most importantly, be resilient and flexible. Most major positive things that happen in the world come from real challenges. The funny thing is that a lot of people see what they consider to be the overnight success, but few really understand the years of dedication and commitment it took for that overnight success.
Before we go any further, I want to make one thing very clear, because this is where people often get confused. This phase isn't asking you to stop living, and it's not asking you to withdraw from the world. It's also not asking you to push harder or figure things out. It's asking you to change how you're engaging with life. When nothing is working, it's usually because the old way of interfacing with reality no longer applies. Force, urgency, and willpower stop producing signal. But that doesn't mean the system has shut down. It means it's reorganizing. So, what we want to talk about now is how to stay engaged without distorting that process, how to remain active, present, and responsible without gripping the outcome or rushing the timeline. This is the posture that allows alignment to emerge cleanly without being contaminated by fear or ego.
That's right. When you're in this phase, it's very natural to keep asking, why isn't this working? But that question assumes that something should be producing a result right now. And often that assumption is exactly what's keeping the system locked up. What I've learned, yeah, and it took me a long time to learn this, is that when you're in transition, the metrics need to change. You need to stop measuring progress by outcomes, and you need to start measuring it by internal progress. If something requires you to constantly justify it to yourself, explain it to other people, or convince yourself that it's going to pay off later, that's usually force, even if it looks reasonable on paper.
Yes, alignment doesn't require self persuasion. When something's truly aligned, there's a sense of internal coherence. It may not feel exciting and it may not feel rewarding in the way people expect, but it doesn't require you to argue with yourself to keep going. Energetically, when people are forcing, I can feel the compression immediately. The field tightens, the system becomes noisy, and higher self guidance doesn't come through noise, it comes through clarity and space. That's why this phase can feel so disorienting. The old way of moving through life no longer works, but the new way hasn't fully revealed itself yet.
And this is where people often make the mistake of thinking they only have two options, either push harder or do nothing at all. But as we said, the best posture is to stay engaged with life, but disengaged from forcing direction. Practically speaking, that means you keep learning, you keep exploring, you keep contributing where it makes sense, but you stop making irreversible moves that lock you into an identity or a story before alignment has landed. And one of the rules I wish I'd understood earlier is this: only take actions you can step back from without collapsing your sense of self. If you can't step back from something without feeling like your identity is at risk, it's probably premature.
That's a very important distinction. Premature commitment creates energetic distortion. When someone commits to a direction before the soul is ready to move, the system tightens in self protection. That's when people say, I chose something and it immediately felt wrong. Most of the time, it's not that the choice itself was wrong, it's that the timing was off. The field wasn't ready to support it yet. That's why incubation is such an important concept here. Incubation is active, but it's not forceful. It allows information, resonance, and alignment to emerge naturally without pressure.
Another thing that helps people a lot at this stage is learning to tell the difference between ego pressure and alignment pressure. They can feel deceptively similar if you've never slowed down enough to notice the difference. Ego pressure tends, to feel urgent, comparative, time bound. There's usually a voice attached to it saying, I should be further along by now, or if I don't act, I'm falling behind. Alignment pressure feels very different. It's calmer, quieter. It doesn't escalate when ignored.
Yes, higher self guidance is patient. It doesn't chase you, it doesn't demand. It waits until the system is quiet enough to receive it without distortion. That's why people who are addicted to intensity often miss it. They're waiting for a sign that feels dramatic, when in reality, alignment shows up as something that simply won't go away, even when you stop thinking about it.
This brings us back to the razor's edge we've been talking about. You can't disengage from life and call it trust, but equally, you can't grip the future and call it purpose. A sentence that really captures this is: you're allowed to be undecided about direction, but you're not allowed to check out of your life. Staying engaged doesn't mean hustling or striving. It means staying relational, staying curious. One final practical thing that really helps people here is narrowing the time horizon. Trying to answer, what am I meant to do with my life, almost always triggers force. And it's too big, too abstract, and too loaded. Instead, the questions need to become much simpler. What supports alignment this week? What drains it? What feels internally clean right now? Those questions keep you moving without pushing.
Purpose doesn't arrive as a long term plan. It arrives as resonance in the present moment. You don't get there by predicting it, you get there by not distorting the signal while it's forming.
So if you're watching this and feeling like you're doing things but nothing is landing, that doesn't mean you're off track. It usually means the old interface with reality has stopped working, and that's actually a sign of readiness. Quick shout out. If you like this content and you haven't already done so, make sure you become a member of our Reclaim Your Purpose School community. It's free to join. We look forward to catching you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks for being here. Bye for now.